Thanks for joining me today. This session is focused on the things you need to consider when looking to move your applications to a cloud provider. I know that the cloud isn't a computer in a data center somewhere, but I was looking for a catchy title. So here we are. I'd like to thank Runecast for inviting me along to speak. Now we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end, so if you could hold them till then, that would be ace. My name is Dan Frith. I'm the head of technology at Digitalsense, a cloud provider in Brisbane, Australia. I cut my teeth on Windows NT 3.51 and have since had over 20 years of experience working with storage, data protection, virtualization, and cloud technologies. I've worked in a variety of organizations, including state government, managed service providers, and large telcos. As the head of technology, I'm accountable for the platform that powers Digitalsense's technology solutions. We offer a VMware-powered cloud platform with a variety of as-a-service offerings on top, including data protection and storage. I get excited when business is able to focus on business rather than the technology that enables the business. My background is very much in traditional infrastructure solutions, rather than those hip cloud-native solutions you've no doubt heard about on the internet. I do know a bit about cloud, however, and I know that it's not always easy to get right. I've seen technology applied in interesting ways to get some cool stuff done. And I've also seen things go terribly wrong because people didn't take the time to think about what they were trying to do. It's my experience that most of the time things go wrong when people rush to make a decision without first fully assessing the situation. It seems like a simple thing, but it's hard to do well. Good solutions take time and money, but if they're important enough to your business, you'll find the effort and expense is worth it. For the last 13 odd years, I've also run a blog in my spare time on data center things over at penguinpunk.net. You can read news about what vendors have been up to, find how-to articles on various enterprise technologies, and hear me moaning about macOS updates that break my Plex server. I also do a semi-regular news article called Random Short Take. And if you get nothing else from that, you'll learn the names of some of my favorite basketball players. If you'd like to connect with me or talk more about anything in this presentation, you can also find me on Twitter and LinkedIn. This session will cover some basic things you should be thinking about when you're looking to move your applications to the cloud. There's an awful lot to consider when it comes to picking the type of computer you want to run your organization's applications on. I'd like to be very clear and say that this session doesn't cover everything. You can think of it more as a starting point for further investigation. Every situation is different, and every organization will have a different set of requirements to work through to get the desired outcome. I won't be sitting here telling you which tools are the best to understand your application's performance requirements, or running demos showing a workload moving from on-premises to a cloud provider. I'll be sticking mainly to the soft stuff, but I hope you'll find it valuable. The format of this presentation is similar to a question and answer session. I've compiled a list of questions that are frequently asked when companies are considering moving applications to the cloud. As with most things in IT though, the answers will vary depending on your wants and needs. You'll notice that a lot of the questions I'm asking are very similar to the questions that you're likely asked when you're looking to deploy an application on premises. Not all of the considerations are the same, but there's a similarity, particularly when you're focusing on traditional application deployments, as opposed to cloud-native applications. You get bonus points if you can guess the true identities of the people asking the questions throughout the presentation. These bonus points can then be used to collect kudos from me. What you do with the kudos you collect is then up to you. Ultimately, your experiences moving workloads to a cloud provider will vary wildly depending on whether you've had the time to do your research and whether your cloud provider has been upfront with its capabilities. It will also depend on what kind of applications you want to move to the cloud. In short, there will be a lot of it depends in this presentation. That's not necessarily a bad thing though. So the cloud, what's it all about then? Whilst it seems a little dated, the definition of cloud computing from the National Institute of Standards and Technology stands up well. The NIST originally defined cloud computing as having the following characteristics: pooled resources, including CPU, memory, storage, and networking, broad network access, application mobility, on-demand self-service, measured service, security, and rapid resource elasticity. There are a number of different ways you can consume these cloud resources, including software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service. I could explain these consumption models with pizza, but I'll leave you to Google that for yourselves. In this presentation, I'm focusing primarily on infrastructure as a service. Clouds also come in a number of deployment models, including private cloud, public cloud, and hybrid cloud. Your requirements will drive what type of cloud you leverage for your workloads. Some people get what they need from public cloud. They just need a pool of resources that are secure and able to host their applications. They want it to be a simple experience with a minimum amount of fuss. Other folks need their cloud to be private. This might be because they don't play well with others and don't want to share infrastructure. It might be because they have some esoteric processing requirements that can only be serviced by dedicated hardware. But they still want to deliver self-service capabilities and elasticity back to their end users. And then some organizations like it to be a combination of different cloud offerings. Like many things, the only right answer for what cloud model is right for you is it depends. So why move to the cloud? You may be surprised to hear that it's not always for technical reasons. Some organizations are looking to move infrastructure and applications to the cloud for financial reasons, not necessarily because it is less expensive, but rather because cloud providers are quite good at offering services that can be consumed via operating expenditure, as opposed to capital expenditure. Some organizations like the idea of spending a certain amount of money on these applications on a monthly basis, rather than paying for the whole thing up front. The CFO may have also read about the cloud in one of these magazines they have on airplanes, and now your operating budget has drastically outstripped your capital budget. It seems crazy, but it does happen, probably more than you'd like to think. Scale is a weird problem to solve. Some applications do well when resources dedicated to the application are scaled up. Some do better when the application is scaled out. Maybe you're having trouble keeping up with the scalability requirements of your applications. You might be a software development shop needing to test your applications at some kind of scale, be that up or out. Deploying an extra 1,000 nodes to test something can be challenging from a logistics perspective. Adding many gigabytes of RAM to your application may be challenging in some environments as well. What a pain to have to wait for all that hardware to turn up. And what if you only want to test the scalability of your application for a brief period of time to prove a point or validate a customer's use case? Theoretically, if you have the money to pay, the larger cloud providers won't have a problem servicing this requirement. It may come as a surprise to some of you, but most organizations don't have a heavy focus on technology. Maybe your company wants to focus more on doing business rather than being an IT organization, at least from an infrastructure perspective. I worked in plenty of places where IT was treated as a necessary evil, and cloud was seen as a way to reduce the reliance on that evil. Leveraging infrastructure as a service is certainly one way to reduce the number of staff required to support your enterprise's infrastructure operations. Sure, you'll pay a little bit more for the privilege, but you're also paying for it to be someone else's problem. Theoretically, at least, you're not just paying for resources to feed and water your infrastructure. You're also paying someone for their expertise when it comes to deploying these solutions. There's a certain amount of comfort that your CEO will feel knowing that your cloud provider has done this many times before, and for customers across all kinds of market segments. The real appeal of moving to the cloud for many organizations is that someone else will take care of a lot of the tricky infrastructure stuff, leaving them to focus on the applications and delivering value back to the business. As you'll see in this presentation, though, it's not always as simple as shifting the problem somewhere else. It's also important to note that moving your applications to the cloud may reduce your reliance on your on-premises infrastructure, but it doesn't automatically absolve you of the risks associated with hosting your applications. Make sure you read the fine print before you wade into your cloud experience. Now let's talk a little bit about what you'll have to do to move your applications from your on-premises infrastructure to a cloud provider. Robert S. from Blackpool asks, will my VMware-based virtual machines run on AWS? Great question, Robert. Migrating virtual machines from one hypervisor to another is now a well-understood process. It is also one that is less risky than it was 5 years ago. That said, it's not entirely magic and not always seamless. You need to make sure your on-premises house is in order before you try to move it to a cloud provider, or you'll just be transferring your mess from one place to another. Make sure your VM hardware versions are up to date. Make sure you have a backup of the machines supporting your application too. And if you can arrange at the time, reboot those machines before you try to move them anywhere to make sure that the machines are healthy. if you're already running VMware-based virtualized workloads, it's also useful to consider moving your workloads to another VMware-powered cloud provider. There are thousands of those around the world, and the big hyperscalers would also be happy to talk to you about how they can help you keep everything looking mostly the same, at least from a hypervisor perspective. Anthony K would like to know, can I move my bare metal workloads to the cloud? You sure can, Anthony. If that's what you want to do, there are plenty of providers that offer bare metal and dedicated hardware for you to do whatever you need to do. Some of them will support cool stuff like GPUs and other special bits of hardware if you need. There are plenty of reasons why you might need to use bare metal, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. You might have security or performance requirements that simply can't be met by virtualized solutions. That said, you will need to be mindful that you may need to pay a premium for access to bare metal infrastructure, and you potentially lose some flexibility when compared to using virtualized resources. Scaling your usage up and down to meet your requirements can potentially be trickier to manage when you're using bare metal. Trent from Cleveland wants to know if he'll need to have an outage. Hi Trent, thanks for your question. You won't always need an outage, but sometimes you will. It depends on a number of factors, including what kind of networking and security requirements you have wrapped around your applications and what the target cloud platform is compared to what you're running on premises. If conditions are perfect, you might be able to migrate your application live from on-premises to your cloud provider, but don't count on it as a given. It's more likely that you'll need to take some kind of outage to perform the migration and do the appropriate testing before you let your users back on. Depending on your application, on how your application is architected, will determine how much impact there is on your end users. Chino from Sacramento writes, can my applications be hosted in the cloud? Chino, it's an interesting problem, but cloud incompatibility is not as common an issue as some pundits on Twitter would have you think. That said, it's important to note that some software providers, even now, refuse to support cloud-hosted deployments of their applications, in much the same way that they were slow to adopt virtualization years ago. Ultimately, the decision to stick with an application vendor is dependent on a whole bunch of factors, including how good the application is at servicing the needs of the business. If the application performs a critical function inside your business and you can't find an alternative way to do that function, then you likely need to toe the line when it comes to the software vendor's requirements. But if there are 5 different vendors doing pretty much the same thing and 4 of them offer cloud-based support, you might want to consider switching to another application vendor, or at least reviewing your existing relationship with that vendor. I know, it's often more complicated than that, and I don't want to get too philosophical here, but we frequently find ourselves in non-optimal situations in IT because we've decided that fixing the problem was all a bit too hard. Tim from Albany writes, what will my network look like when I'm hosting workloads in the cloud? Tim, it doesn't need to look drastically different, but it might too. Do you have networking needs that are a little odd, or maybe a little special? Or perhaps these needs are a function of your enterprise's historical requirements. Do you think stretched layer 2 between availability zones shouldn't be a big problem? I can guarantee that your cloud provider will think a little differently about that. That said, there are a number of different ways that networking requirements can be encapsulated inside other technologies to meet those needs without making a mess of your network or the cloud providers. But you should take the time to understand how your applications and network interact at the moment. At that point, it becomes easy to understand what compromises you're willing to make to move workloads into a different architecture. Some folks quickly come to the conclusion that it's a lot easier to re-IP a few applications than it is finding a cloud provider to perform the technical gymnastics required to meet their needs. I'm simplifying things, obviously, but I've been privy to a few situations where everything would have been a lot simpler and less time-consuming if folks were willing to tweak their application's network requirements. Henry R. from Washington, D.C. asks, how will my application perform when it's hosted in Amsterdam and I'm accessing it from Sydney? Henry, thanks for the hard-hitting question. Are your applications particularly latency sensitive? Will your application be unhappy if it takes too long to get a response from the user? Or from another application component hosted in a faraway land? For most applications, latency isn't the worst thing in the world, but physics is still physics, and there's only so much distance data can travel in a particular amount of time. This can have a real impact on application performance, particularly for your end users. You also need to consider how much data will travel between your application and your end users. If it's a bandwidth-heavy requirement, you may find that you'll want your application hosted a little closer to your users. Some applications have a requirement for large amounts of CPU or RAM, or both, and those can be challenging to service with some cloud providers, or the cost is simply prohibitive. You'll want to confirm with your provider that can service your performance needs. Hopefully, you'll already have monitoring tools in place in your existing environment. These will help you understand what your current resources are doing from a processing, memory, storage, and networking perspective. You'll need this understanding to assess whether your chosen provider can service your needs effectively. And while you're considering hosting an application in a data center on the other side of the world, think about what your availability requirements are in terms of support. If you call your provider with a problem and it's the middle of the night for them, there's a good chance they won't answer, and that might be an issue for you. A lot of providers offer follow the sun support nowadays, but it's a good idea to check that this service is included in the standard offering. The last thing you want to do is get a bill from your provider because your users have been calling them out of hours. Kim G from Rochester asks, how will I secure my application and data? Will my cloud provider be able to see my data? Kim, I love where your head is at. Most all cloud providers will provide a mechanism for identity and access management that will allow you to secure your data appropriately. That said, it's extremely important that you understand that the provision of a security mechanism doesn't automatically mean that your data will be protected. You need to ensure this for yourself. Most cloud providers are all care and no responsibility when it comes to this. If you haven't taken the appropriate measures, you're leaving yourself and your company exposed. You don't want to become the next news story about how you've left sensitive data lying about on the internet for the world to see. It's much like having locks on the doors, but not actually using them. Glenn D tells me that his business is sensitive when it comes to storing data offshore. Will his cloud provider make him store his data where he doesn't want to? Glenn, that's a really important consideration. In short, no, not if you don't want them to. The world is global, but many organizations are still concerned about where applications and data are stored. This is fair and reasonable. Most of the larger cloud providers will have a presence in a variety of continents and will give you the ability to control where your data is stored. Obviously, if you're concerned about foreign governments somehow getting access to your data, make sure you've encrypted it and don't leave the passphrase on a piece of paper under your keyboard or in a plain text file on your desktop. You're in control here and you don't need to do anything you don't want to do. But you do need to check first that what you're signing up for meets your requirements. There's nothing exciting about requirements gathering and designing solutions to fit those requirements. But it's critical to the success of your application deployments. It's important that you don't rush it though. You don't need to feel like it has to be a race to the cloud. You're not a bad person if it takes a little longer to get there. People will think you're a bad person though if you jam their applications in the cloud and they run poorly. Or worse, if your sensitive data is stolen or otherwise compromised because you were in a rush to get it stored in the cloud. Johnny C from Kingsland asks, can I license my applications to run on a cloud provider's platform? Johnny, most of the time this won't be a problem. Most software vendors will let you migrate your application licensing to a cloud provider with a minimum of fuss. But make sure you check with your vendor. Some will insist that you change the type of license you use or the way it's paid for. There are a bunch of variations of licensing editions that cloud providers can offer, and some vendors will let you bring your own perpetual licenses and use those in your cloud environment. Some software vendors will insist that the only way to use their software in the cloud is by using their version of the cloud. Those vendors should get in the bin, but for some reason people still buy software from them. Mike M from Venice, California asks, will my licensing costs be reduced? Mike, it really does depend. You might find yourself in a situation where you don't need as many licenses as you did when hosting the application on premises. This could be because your cloud provider is able to provide improved hardware density compared to the crusty old hardware you've been using for the last 7 years. Remember that everything is better when it's new. That said, you may also find yourself in a situation where you will need to spend more on licensing to meet your requirements. This could be because your users are finding it easier to deploy more workloads in the cloud. Much like VM sprawl has become an issue in the enterprise thanks to the rise of virtualization, so too has sprawl become a problem in the cloud. This will certainly lead to more costs, not less. I recommend you work with your application vendors and cloud provider to understand what the deployment model looks like when it's moved to a cloud environment. If nothing else, this will give you the appearance of certainty when it comes to your ongoing costs. Eric from Long Island would like to know, should I store all my data near my application? Eric, I'm glad you asked. Most applications are pointless without data. Some applications have that data stored within the application, but some applications need access to large swathes of data, and this isn't always stored on the same platform as your application. You might have an application that runs on a particular compute platform on premises, and the data resides on an object storage platform hosted in the cloud. If your application is heavily dependent on data processing or needs to be in close proximity to the application data, you'll need to consider the cost of hosting that data with your cloud provider as well. Most providers don't charge for data ingress, but may charge based on the number of operations performed on the data, or when the data is recalled from the storage platform to the application. It might only be a fraction of a cent, but do it a few million times, and you might be looking at a tough pill to swallow. Remember also, if you need to have a certain amount of data mobility or access to your data from edge applications, you may find that data locality becomes a super critical consideration. Like most things, it's important to understand what your application is doing, as this will help inform how you can architect your cloud presence more effectively. Remember, data locality isn't just about how well your applications will perform in the cloud. It's also about how much it will cost you to access the data you need when you need it. Mike has asked, is picking up all my existing stuff and dumping it in someone else's data center the best idea ever? Or should I think about refactoring my applications before I move them to the cloud? Maybe, but maybe not. Mike, it probably sounds like a massive pain to refactor your applications, particularly if they're old and not terribly well understood by your IT folks. After all, the whole reason you virtualized those applications in the first place was to avoid having to deal with upgrading or changing them, right? Some particularly crusty enterprise applications might take 2 years to rebuild and modernize. All that requirements gathering, application design, development work, testing, expense, what a pain. Why not just lift and shift, or move and improve, as some vendors like to call it? Because there might be some smarter things you can do with your applications. Your business might have changed quite a bit since that application was first developed. And what if you lift and shift your application and it doesn't perform as well as it did when it was hosted on premises? Will you have to roll it back? What if your cloud provider can give you some more efficient options to store your data, and you can leverage some cloud-native applications to get the same result? Wouldn't that be easier? I've seen quite a few instances, particularly in government departments and larger enterprise organizations, where folks have talked themselves out of refactoring their applications because it all seemed too hard. Fast forward 12 months, and it likely could have been simpler to uplift your application rather than trying to get it running efficiently on your cloud provider of choice. As I said earlier in this presentation, it doesn't need to be a race to the cloud. It can be a slow and steady march to get there too. Perry from Queens writes, data protection seems like something I need to think about. Will my cloud provider protect my data for me? Perry, your cloud provider can very likely protect your data in a number of ways if you want to pay for it. Most providers will either offer data protection as a service or provide a mechanism for you to deploy your own data protection solution to keep your data safe. Remember that it's all sitting on a computer somewhere, and if your provider hasn't said it's being looked after, then it's up to you to take care of it. Data protection means a lot of things to a lot of different people, and I don't have time to go into everything right now, but think about how long you can go without your data, and think about what it will take to get that data back if it goes missing. Think about how much time or money you'll lose if you don't have access to your data. Then talk to your cloud provider about what solutions it has to offer. Some of the other things you might want to consider include how frequently your data will be backed up, how long it will take to recover, how long will your provider keep your data online for. Other things to think about are the kinds of backups that can be performed against your data. Is it just a series of snapshots? Will there be an application consistent backup option as well? Will all of the data you store in the cloud be protected by your provider? This becomes increasingly important as more enterprises expand their footprint from basic IaaS to SaaS offerings such as Microsoft 365. It's one thing to ensure that my virtual machines are being protected regularly, but what about my emails and SharePoint data? As I've said a few times already in this presentation, the considerations you need to take when hosting applications on premises apply equally when moving your applications to the cloud. One thing to keep in mind is that if your data protection policy was written in the earlier part of this century, you may have an issue getting your data on tape in an efficient or cost-effective fashion. And Milo would like to know what will happen if his cloud provider loses a data center, or worse, goes broke and disappears. Milo, that sounds like a bad thing, and it's absolutely something you need to be thinking about, particularly if you're going all in with hosting your applications in the cloud. Your provider going dark or broke would be a real disaster, and something you'll need to be prepared for. There are two things to think about here. If your provider goes offline for a period of time, what is the impact on your business? That's an availability consideration and something you can design into your application architecture. Just as you did when you deployed your applications on premises, you should consider the resiliency and availability requirements of the applications that will be hosted with your cloud provider. Banks and financial services organizations are usually sensitive to outages of any amount of time, as it invariably costs money to be down. While most providers have the mechanisms in place to host data in multiple locations, that doesn't mean that they've turned that on by default. Your applications need to be able to take advantage of these features, or you need to have tools in place to protect your data across multiple locations. As for your provider going broke and disappearing, you need to consider the recovery tools you have available and how those will impact your ability to recover in the event of this kind of disaster. These tools could also impact the time it takes to recover, and you need to be sure that this fits in with your executive team's view of how quickly your data can be recovered. Ignoring the risks associated with not adequately protecting your data and applications in the cloud is commonly known as career limiting activity. You also need to think about the impact of having all of your data stored with one provider, particularly if that provider one day goes away, or just as likely, locks you out of your applications due to a billing dispute. Fred D from Jacksonville would like to know if multi-cloud is a real thing. If so, can he keep his applications on more than one cloud? Fred, I can tell you've been trying to keep up to date on what's hot in the cloud world. I think it's reasonable to say that multi-cloud has gone beyond the realms of slideware and become a reality, at least for some people. That said, it's still not an easy thing to do well. What's more likely is that you'll be hosting particular applications with one cloud provider and other applications with another provider. When it becomes challenging is understanding where all your applications are hosted, how to manage those applications effectively, and how to ensure that your applications are running where you'll get the most value from them. Remember that you're hosting applications in cloud environments because you have a business requirement to meet, not a desire to complete a science project. I don't endorse spreading your applications across more than one provider unless you're really sure you know what you're doing. There can be some real benefits to this approach, including some commercial and technical risk mitigation. But having seen some of this stuff get stitched together, I recommend that you think long and hard before you take the leap. Dave G from Warren, Ohio wants to know if he can see the cloud. Well, Dave, that's a great question, and you're not the first to ask. In short, it's unusual that the bigger providers will take you on a tour of their data centers and show you how they do things. There's some information on the internet about how all this fits together, but if you're the type of customer who likes to be able to point out your infrastructure to your CFO, you may struggle. If this is absolutely a requirement, and who am I to judge, it might be an idea to engage with a smaller provider. The folks there will generally be more enthusiastic about showing what they can do and how well they've done it. It's my opinion that the era of data center tours to look at the blinking lights is largely over, but I do understand the appeal. Finally, there's a lot to consider when moving to the cloud, even something as well understood as infrastructure as a service. I've talked a lot about security, performance, financial considerations, and risk. Ultimately, you'll enjoy the most success moving your applications to the cloud when you spend time doing requirements gathering. Taking your time assessing your options and working out what solution best suits the needs of your business. Of course, most of this work would be something that you've already considered when it comes to hosting your workloads on premises. I'd love to sprinkle a handful of magic fairy dust over your applications and tell you that you're sparkly and ready to go. But really what you need to do is look at your application requirements. Look at what your cloud provider has to offer and get those two things in alignment. It sounds basic, it sounds oversimplified, but if you don't have that, you'll struggle to get the outcome you're looking for. Ultimately, the likelihood of success is linked to the amount of preparation you've done prior. It's also important to pick the right tool for the job. The best advice I can offer is that you take the time to map out your application and data requirements and assess your readiness before you dive into the cloud. It's not exciting, it's not magic, but it's how you can find success. Before I go, I'd like to talk briefly about Digitalsense. We're an enterprise that supports other enterprises with secure, robust solutions. We're founded in 2006, based out of Brisbane, Australia. We use best-of-breed hardware and software to deliver a platform that powers all types of organizations and their applications. If you're based in Australia and looking for a service provider to help with the transition to cloud, please feel free to drop me a line. I'm going to try and do something tricky now and jump to Q&A. Thanks for listening. Okay. Oh, thanks, Kev. Yes, don't leave your keys in an open bucket. Exactly. So if anyone has any Q&A questions, please feel free to jump in. So Tony asks, what's my view of data protection in the cloud? I'm going to say I'm all for it, but it has to be done right. It's one thing to, I guess it goes back to depending on what kind of applications you're protecting in the cloud. If it's a pure IaaS play, then potentially the pure IaaS data protection solutions will work really well for you. If you're looking to do cloud native data protection, then you really need to think about some cloud native data protection solutions. And getting the right blend of those is not as easy as you might think either. But requirements. So exciting, so hot right now. So Andre is asking why people move their workloads to Digitalsense. Thanks for that, Andre. A lot of people move their workloads to Digitalsense because we are a cloud provider that cares. In a way, we're a local company out of Brisbane, so if you have a problem, you can come and talk to us. We're very good at, I guess, meeting requirements of the customers. So we don't just say this is it, you take it or leave it. We tend to focus on delivering, I guess, the best solution both for you and for us. So we're interested in making sure that your applications run as best as they can. We listen to you when you have requirements or when you have issues or when you have particular needs that can't be met by the bigger hyperscalers. So that's really what Digitalsense is all about, that, I guess, human approach to cloud hosting, if there is such a thing. And this is why I'm not in sales. But thank you, Andre. It was a good one nonetheless. Oh, Tony, thanks for asking about application performance in the cloud. So there's a couple of different, I guess, ways you can do that. It really depends on the kind of cloud you're leveraging, whether it's a VMware-based thing, whether it's a KVM-based. Various cloud providers have various solutions for application monitoring. Something you need to think about, I guess, as well. I talked about latency and bandwidth and obviously data locality. Those are all important factors to consider when you're looking at a bunch of graphs. Most of the time, your cloud provider will share a lot of that information with you because their agreements with you are based on the performance of the cloud and the performance of your applications on that cloud. So I guess there's a various different ways to do it. Most of the time, your cloud provider should be providing you with some tools to be able to do that rather than you having to go and deploy your own stuff. So you don't necessarily have to go do your own VROPs of that. The cloud provider will do a tenancy-based thing for you if they've got it together. And that's generally the best way to do it. And it's, I think really what's important actually when you do start to talk about application performance, just like on premises, it's important to be able to baseline that application and understand what good looks like, because I think often we go, oh, I've got 20 millisecond round trip time, or my latency is quite high. And then if you compare that, if you don't have any information about what that looked like when it was hosted on premises or when it was a different storage environment or something like that, you've got really nothing to benchmark it against. So I think what's when it becomes really interesting is having that baseline to compare against. I think that's one of the really useful things that you can do. So it's not all about collecting the metrics. It's actually about reading them and understanding them and making some sense out of them in the context of what you're trying to do. And if you move something to the cloud and your end users don't think it's any worse, or they're accessing everything over a virtual desktop anyway, so it's just all screenscapes to them, then happy days. That doesn't have to be a problem either. Okay, so if there's no more questions, I think we'll wrap it up there. If oh, sorry, there was one more. Industry verticals. Good question, Paul. So just quickly, industry verticals. Certainly, the ones we deal with mostly are local and state government. I feel that large enterprise is ripe, I guess, for a lot of certainly IaaS, and obviously the startups are a little bit more friendly with the cloud native stuff. I see it actually a very similar situation to the data protection providers. So the newer ones obviously don't have that legacy debt to deal with, so they tend to be a little bit more agile, and certainly startups and newer companies in the market are a little bit more agile, not so built in, so they tend to go cloud native pretty quickly. The big enterprise is a bit slower to move, harder to get the stuff there. Tend to pick IaaS and lift and shift. So that's kind of where I'm seeing it. Mainly around government at this stage, or certainly in Queensland, because that's the bulk of the industry up here is government, ironically. Okay, so hit me up on Twitter at @PenguinPunk if you want to keep talking more. I really appreciate you guys coming along to my session. Yes, Andreas, multi-cloud is definitely hard. Abstracting away provider-specific features, otherwise you fall into a dependency trap. Exactly, and then you start to lose out on some of those features that those cloud providers can offer you. And then what was the point? That's kind of, you abstract away everything to such a point, in the same way that you might do storage abstraction. You go, well, I just need some spinning disk to do some stuff. And then you realize that you lost all these cool features that all these storage companies were able to give you. So that's definitely a risk with multi-cloud. And I guess with any cloud in general, if you, you can really get yourself into trouble. So I'm going to wrap the session up now. I really appreciate everyone's attendance. Thanks very much again for coming. And I hope to chat with you soon on Twitter. Cheers.